Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm about to feed some worms. And just to see if I can make these gloves last one more time, I put some blue tape on my finger here that had a hole in the glove from the last time I used it. So we'll see how that holds up. But it'll probably be the last time we see this glove in service. So I've got some stuff on the side here that we're going to feed with today. And one of the items kind of plays into what was fed last time, 10 days ago. 10 days ago, when we were in here, we gave this bin a fairly routine feeding, some veggies and stuff like that. But one of the things that went in here was a pile of noodles, leftover spaghetti noodles. And the wad of noodles was kind of frozen. I couldn't spread it out much, so it was really just sort of a lump of noodles in the middle of the feeding area. I was definitely curious to see how those come along, and after 10 days, I don't know, I'm curious to see if there's been any progress made. I'm definitely noticing a sort of a divot down the middle where the feeding was applied, and that's usually a pretty good indication that the food they've been given is getting depleted. Sorry, I need to go on a little hunting mission here. I saw a centipede amongst a bunch of other insects. All these little, I see a little spider here, all those what appear to be flying insects. I don't know, I'm not too worried about all those. It's just the centipedes I know prey on worms. I didn't want that centipede cruising around in here, so I took care of them. See a curious worm hanging out here on the surface. Now, I don't know what kind of worm that is. This is my so-called mixed bin of worms, and by that I just mean there's a variety of red wigglers in the bin. There are some Indian blue worms, and there are also some European night crawlers. We tend to believe that the blue worms are what we see in the greatest numbers in this bin, and they're usually pretty obvious, just based on the fact that they move so quickly. So I'm assuming that that might be one of them. The other telltale is that little bulge on their body near their heads, that thing called the clitellum, is there on a mature worm, as it should be, but it's so flush with the rest of the body that it's hard to tell that it's even there. So you can easily mistake it as perhaps a juvenile red wiggler or something. But we're going to check out how the food's holding up here. Curious to see how those noodles are holding up. And today's feeding, back to what I was talking about before, does tie into last week's feeding. So a big pile of spaghetti is a pretty starchy meal. So I think hopefully they liked it, because what I was going to go with today is kind of a follow-up starchy meal. Today's starchy meal is going to consist of leftover rice from a couple days ago. I set it aside with the intention of feeding it to my worms. And I think I just forgot yesterday when I came down here to feed a couple bins. I should have probably gotten rid of the stuff at that point, but I sort of let it slip my mind, and the stuff just sat out there on the kitchen counter for one more day. And today's the day it gets fed to worms, and this is the lucky batch that's going to get it. So this is an old mango seed, or the husk of a mango seed. I think this stuff here, this is probably what's left of the noodles, because whenever you put some sort of like a cereal sort of stuff into a bin, or noodles, the stuff breaks down into just this goo, basically. I can see a bunch of it here and there, and they'll eat it all in time. I'm sure they've already eaten a good bit of it, but it no longer looks anything like it did when it was still a noodle. It just becomes a paste in a way. So I'm going to see what I could do about spreading that out a little bit as I open up the old feeding area. It was only in the middle, so I'm sure only in the middle is where we would expect to find it. You can recognize what some of these other feeding items were from last time. That's the skin of a cantaloupe melon, in case you don't recognize it. Most people probably do. I've tilled up this entire feeding area. You might have noticed I was also picking out a couple of these slower composting food items while I was at it. I don't know, just figured I would try to see how they're coming along and see how many of them I could find at all. I'm sure there's a bunch of them floating around in here, because those two smaller ones right there, those are bits of corn cob, so where you see one, there's bound to be many more. There's a little bit more of the leftovers from the last time we fed. Certainly not much if you think about it. They put some damage on this last feeding, 10 days worth. This piece just looks so cool, how they nibble out all the softer pieces out of the skin and leave the tougher stuff until it's had a chance to soften up, and then they do away with that too. But the way they kind of do away with their food in little phases, that's interesting. Hardly counts as leftovers, but it is, so I'll put it over there with the rest of the leftovers. But for 10 days, you could see that they didn't leave much, that's for sure. And I do believe that most of the stuff they got last week were things that would be expected to break down pretty quickly in a bin. Because now, this bin being 109 days old, last time we checked in it was 99 days old. But at 109 days of age, I'll typically try to avoid slow composting food items. Most of the stuff I'll put into a bin like this are things that I would expect to see break down pretty quickly. So, something like this mango seed, well, it'll probably go in a few more weeks. It'll keep breaking down. But I certainly wouldn't want to place a new one of those in here at this stage. There's maybe just a little bit more of this gooey, probably leftovers of the spaghetti over here. But I think we've made a good enough opening here that we can apply today's feeding into. I'm going to go really generous today. So besides that rice, look at the size of this bag here. This is just one of my storage bags in my freezer that I keep all kinds of different stuff in. You see lettuce leaves, carrot shavings, maybe cantaloupe rind, all kinds of goodies for them in here. And it's definitely a good portion. I'm going to give it to them all. Because if you're a regular on my channel, you know that not too long ago I had some issues with my refrigerator being left open, my own fault. And a lot of stuff in the freezer got spoiled as a result of that. Well, I think that the refrigerator might have sort of experienced a little bit more effects of that, maybe. Maybe that's the reason it's currently completely out of service, unplugged from the wall, taken apart partially. Let's see if I can do this without making a mess here. I did find a bunch of portions of it that were frozen, especially the portion that sends the cold air from the freezer down into the lower parts of the refrigerator. That little tube was pretty much frozen, filled with ice. So I unclogged it and kind of letting it thaw out a little bit now. So I'll have to go back up there after we're done here to sort of put the fridge back together and hope for the best, turn it back on. Now, I always miss a step, right? If you're a regular on my channel, you know that I'm famous for missing steps here and there. But one thing I've been really wanting to do is mix stuff together with these small shreds of paper that I use as bedding. Because I don't want to see clumps of stuff, kind of like we saw clumps of the spaghetti noodle pasta material clumping together. The paper does that too. And I've been experimenting with just trying to apply the paper in such a way that it's sort of mixed with some of the neighboring materials to put stuff, whatever the stuff may be, it doesn't matter, just some sort of stuff between the layers of paper so they don't mat up against each other. So I don't know, we'll see. Hopefully it works. I just don't like finding big clumps of anything, especially big wads of paper all stuck together if it could have been avoided. So now on top of all that rice is going to go all of this food. And it's definitely a generous portion. But since all the stuff in my freezer is currently out of there and thawing, I figured I would just take this entire collection bag. Even though it seemed like a pretty generous amount, I figured I would just give it all to them and hope for the best. If you look at some of this stuff, banana peels, maybe the stem of the banana might take a little bit longer, but all these leaves of lettuce, even this butt end of a head of lettuce, this chunk of tomato, all stuff that were used to make a salad, all these shavings of cucumber, all this stuff seems like stuff that's going to get polished off quickly. All delicious, easy to eat stuff. Perhaps the only thing that will slow them down is the stem of the banana, which sometimes stays around for a little while, but I think this bin will be in service for a little while longer. And there should be plenty of time for those couple banana stems to break down just as well. We've got some pulverized eggshell here we're going to drop onto the feeding as a grit source for the little guys. And it does seem like we've got a pretty good sized population in this bin. We didn't get a chance to see what's on the outer edges of the bin though, so as we start to cover up here in the middle, we'll also probe down into the sides. So I've been I even did it last week already, maybe even the prior feeding. I've already started holding off on adding more fresh leafy matter to these older bins of mine, and this one I believe already last week received no fresh leafy matter. So I'm sticking to that, so that the only stuff I put into the bin is fast composting stuff. The leaves themselves are, you know, fast composting food items for sure. It's just that the stems that come in with each leaf are, you know, what I consider to be the slow composting piece in there. So I definitely hold off towards the later stages of a bin's life when it comes to using leaves. As much as I love using leaves, and I've got so many leaves to use, I just hate the idea of having a batch of what seems to be finished compost that is just full of, you know, sticks and stems and little bits of leaves that, you know, maybe could have been avoided or could have not been placed into the bin. So let's give a good cover up. Try to move what remains of this leafy stuff to the middle, so maybe at the end we could use a bit of it to cover up with. Usually I'll take the older stuff and mix it in with the feeding and then apply fresh leafy matter as a top covering, but since we're not applying fresh, we're going to see what we could do about making this remaining stuff last. Alright, really quick, let's just see. I'm curious what's happening over here on this edge. The material's nice and flaky. It's got dampness to it, but it's not overly damp. You could see a few worms hanging out in it, but you could tell that the main attraction was where the food had been when we were opening up the feeding area. Definitely the spot where we saw the greatest number of worms hanging out. So let's just backfill these outer edges. I like doing this because at the same time I'm usually mixing in some of this unbroken down leaves and paper and stuff down into that outer edge so that it has a greater chance at being broken down, being submerged. All this stuff that floats on the top, I usually expect it to just sit there and remain pretty dry. And to me, it always seems like the stuff that's submerged down is the stuff that's going to get the most attention from the worms. Really nice. Really castings rich material. Still a bunch of stuff mixed in between all the castings. But for a 109-day-old bin, this does sort of look about par for the course in terms of a really great number of castings starting to pile up already. So this is now the 12th feeding for a 109-day-old bin. On another bin of mine that's 100, maybe 32 days old, last time we checked on it, it had just received its 15th feeding. It was at that point that it decided in that bin to withhold future feedings and let the bin go into what I consider the foraging phase. And in the foraging phase, my expectation is that the worms are going to continue chewing and eating and gobbling up stuff, as they always do, but since they're not getting anything fresh, they're focusing on all the remaining little bits of leftover scraps throughout the bin. And in this bin, you'll see, just from looking at the stuff as we probe through it all over the place, is although it's rich with castings, it's also quite rich with lots and lots of stuff that the worms could eat in all directions. So this bin would do just fine if I decided to stop feeding it today on its 12th feeding, but I think we're going to go a little bit longer with it before we decide to try to harvest the castings. So that's pretty much where we stand right now with my 109-day-old mixed bin of worms. We'll just bring back in some of these covering items so we could you know, cover up and put away. And naturally I'll have a few things to clean up as well when I'm done, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please, as always, remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.